Hello! Let's have a look at Illustrator's workspace today. We're going to go through opening a new file and different attributes for those files, and then how to navigate through the workspace inside Illustrator, looking at tools, menu items, and palettes. We're going to start off by jumping into the welcome screen, which is what Illustrator opens up first. As long as you have that set in your preferences, you can turn that off and you won't see it, which is fine, but I find it quite helpful, and I think that most people do as well. So first thing in the welcome screen is trying to identify a project that you want to begin working with, and that means creating a new file or perhaps opening one that's already existed. A new file, if you click on this button here, it'll go to the window that allows you to specify what you want for a new file, or you can go to File New or File Open, things that you would typically expect to find under the File menu. So if I click Create New, it'll open up the new document window, and here I need to go through certain settings to make sure I'm getting what I want that's appropriate for the file that I am going to begin working in. The document settings, meaning size, resolution, maybe even color space. And a lot of this is going to be specific to the assignments that I give you in class, or perhaps specific to a project you might be working on outside of class, either professionally or personally. There's a little menu bar at the top here that gives you some presets, and the presets are fantastic. Each preset comes with a group of attributes that are specific to that workspace. Either it's mobile devices or web work, print work, film and video, or just illustration and design. You will see recent files listed here in this first window. If you have anything that you've been working on in the past, they'll be here with little thumbnails so you can identify them, the name, etc. But if you click on mobile, you'll see that there are presets available for mobile devices. It defaults just to the first four, but you can click on all presets. There's iPhone, there's iPads, there's Google phones, Surface Pros, Samsung, whatnot. So you can go through and identify a mobile device, and that'll quickly go to the specifics of what dimensions, pixel-wise, resolution, etc., is going to work best for that device. It's really handy. Same with web. If I go to web presets, these are web presets for things like either full screens or different computers that you can shoot for. They used to have something in here that was for banners, but now you just, like, banners, I guess they still exist, but you can make them whatever size you want. There's print presets. The print presets here are typically ones that we would recognize by name, perhaps not by the little dimensions that they have underneath there. Letter is an 8.5 by 11, but currently it's showing me that it's 612 by 794 points. We don't really know what points are, but points are a lot like pixels. But we can change these measurement units very easily, and I'll show you that here in a second. Film and video presets, so some HD, 4K, 8K, and then art and illustration presets. Obviously, a postcard, a poster, these are things that you might be making, and then there's more. You can look at a tabloid, which is an 11 by 17, etc. So very similar to print work, but not necessarily could be intended for screen. Most of the work that we're going to be doing in this class is going to be based around the print preset for letter, just because in the event that you would ever want to print anything that we did in class, it'll be convenient translation for any of the work that we've done. So if I click on letter, it shows me over on the right hand side here several things. First, I'd want to name this. Since I'm just talking about the workspace, I'm just going to call this workspace. I can spell it, workspace. Nothing about saving it or in a directory or anything like that yet. And then the width and the height, these are in points by default, which is a little irritating, but you can change that in your preferences, as we just found out in the previous video. You can set this to pixels, notice that it's the same. A point is pretty much the same thing as a pixel. Pixels are a term that we're more familiar with. And then you could also change it to inches. I think inches, when working with print work, makes more sense because you're thinking about a physical product that you could hold in your hand, and it has dimensional qualities, and we're used to working in inches. So you could change that if you really wanted to. And at this point, it doesn't really matter. You have an orientation for your document. You can have it be portrait, or you can change it to landscape. So if you're working with something that's more tall and vertical, and you might want to use the portrait option, or if you're working with something that has a little more width to it, set it to landscape. This will come in handy as we're doing still life work for the first couple weeks here. Think about your object, think about what type of orientation the artboard should be in. Artboard, speaking of, is the next option, and that is how many canvases basically do you want in your document. You can have a lot. There must be a limit, but I'm going to say unlimited. The most artboards that we'll be using in our class, I believe, is just 2, but I've had documents where I've had 20 artboards in the same file, and it's really kind of convenient because you still only have one file that lives on your computer, but once you open it up, it's got many different pages or canvases, whatever you want to call that. And if we look down below, I'm going to skip the bleed because we'll get into that in the next video, which covers artboards. Here we have color mode, and since we're in a print space, it thinks that we want to do print work, and that is CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. It doesn't really matter for most of the work that we're doing until we get to the publishing stuff, where we will specifically be asking you to put your documents into the color space of CMYK. For the most part, everything's going to be on the screen, and we can set that to be RGB. You might get a little alert sign, no problem. It's fine. And then the raster effects set to high, 300. This is good just in case we want to print any of our work. This is raster effects, which means there are some things you can do to your vector files, like add a drop shadow, add a glow, some other sort of, effects that are actually based on pixels in the raster art, not actual mathematically based vector stuff. So in order to make those look good for print, you leave that at high, and that's going to be dandy. So now if I just hit create, we end up having our workspace change, and here's my artboard, single artboard. It's an 8.5 by 11, and I'm ready to jump in, but we're not going to really be creating anything right now. We're going to be looking at all of the different elements throughout the workspace. The menu at the top of the window has Illustrator. We've already talked about preferences, and this is where you can quit it or hide it, whatever. The file menu, things you'd expect to find in the file menu. So new, open recent, just open something, find your directory. You can close it, save copies, export, printing, etc. You can also change your document setup, which would be color space, etc. The edit menu has typical edit options here: copy, paste, undo, redo, and then a bunch of other stuff that we'll probably never even touch. Object we'll get into later, but it's really a handy menu. We're going to be using this a lot with our elements as we create our designs. There's a type menu, a selection menu, very handy. We'll talk about that later. Effects, just the same, but this is where you'd find like your drop shadows and stuff like that. And then the view menu is pretty handy. The view menu is where you would identify ways to set up your guides or grids, things like that. So you could, by default, this thing has smart guides selected, and I hate smart guides, so I already went through and turned it off. You might want to turn it off. Smart guides kind of get in the way for me, but some people love them. The other thing that you'll see that is checked by default is the snap to pixel, and I think snap to point or glyph. Some of those are checked. They're really annoying, and they get in the way of you having absolute control of where points go. They're great if you need them. You can come back and turn those things on, but maybe right now just go through and uncheck those. Window is another very useful menu, and this is where you can find all of the different palettes that provide you the attributes of things like brushes, colors, palettes, gradients, transparencies, the Pathfinder tool, all sorts of things. The convenient thing is that most of the ones that you're going to use are already popped up with these little quick jump buttons on the right side of your screen. So like, for example, if I click on color, this is my color palette window. That has also transform, align, and Pathfinder stuck in there, kind of bundled up, but they're also just stacked here. Any of this stuff can be modified. You can close the window if you want completely. You can open it up so that you see all of the things all at once. That's what those little arrows are for. But if any of these disappear, you don't have them, you want to access one, they're all found under the window menu. So that's where I could pull up color. Boom, there it is. So even if this is not available on the right-hand side, you can use the window menu to get to that. The other most valuable palette is the properties palette. This is where you're going to find right now just artboard information, but if I had art on the canvas, for example, this rectangle, I have attributes for this that tells me what my coordinates are for the rectangle, what my width and height is for the rectangle, my appearance attributes, so my fill, I could set that to be red, and I could change my stroke, the weight, things like that, my alignment. So very handy per object that is selected. So right now this is just a rectangle. I selected it, and it has to do with the rectangle. If I had text in here, I'll just leave it with lorem ipsum. I have now character information, so I could increase my size. I can change my font and my paragraph alignment, things like that. So based on what you have selected, the information in the properties window is going to change. Super great. You're also going to find your layers palette tucked in there. Layers are critical, as you probably know from working with Photoshop. I have a feeling most of you have already worked with Photoshop and you understand the importance of layers, hierarchy, stacking, the way they work with each other, obscure each other. So the layers are going to be another window that you're going to need to access quite frequently. And then there is the libraries. The library is something that Adobe incorporates here. So if you have your own colors that you've created with Adobe, or your own fonts that you've saved, even files and stuff like that, you can access all of that right there through that palette. And then the toolbar is on the left. The toolbar has all of the things that we need to use to create and modify, transform, and manage the objects that we're going to be using for our designs and illustrations. And we'll go through all of this in detail in a different video, but everything from moving, drawing, erasing, coloring, transforming, etc., colors, swatches here. And then we have at the bottom of the window our magnification. Which magnification do you want to be viewing your work at? You can pick something, or you can just use the shortcuts of like Command plus or minus to zoom in. Then there is a scroll bar, so you can scroll around. Sometimes you might click over here by accident and you're like, shoot, where'd my work go? You might have to use those to come back and find it. So, obviously, I think we all know what scroll bars are. So in a nutshell, that is the interface for Illustrator. It's not too crazy. It's not too heavy. And we will move on now to the artboards so that we can really set up a project and manage the artboards within our own documents. All right, thanks.